Okay, so let's crack on then. So Lean in Leeds, we are a force for change. So Lean in Circles was started by Sheryl Sandberg, Facebook COO, following the launch of her best-selling book of the same name. And Lean in Circles are typically small groups who meet regularly to learn and grow together. And there are 49,000 circles all across the world, and they are changing lives. So Lean in Leeds is one of the largest lean in movements in the UK. We have got a membership of over 800. I think it was 835 I saw today, and we are still growing. We welcome everybody, irrespective of gender. All that we ask are people are passionate about improving the quality of life and opportunities for women and girls and achieving gender equality for all. And we run events across Leeds to discuss all of our experiences and ways that we can navigate life and work to achieve our goals. So we aim that our meetings are fun, inclusive and informal and suitable for anyone at any age or stage of life. So Lean in Leeds specifically, sorry, I'm just breaking off because people keep popping into the waiting room. So I'm just letting them in while I'm doing this. So we were established in 2015. We have over 800 members, as I mentioned. We have to date run over 50 free events hosted by and for the Leeds community. Evening events, breakfast club, and we had our first conference last year, which was called Unspoken. Another little feather in our cap is our now infamous mentoring program with over 230 matched mentees and mentors. And we are all run by volunteers. We all have a day job and we're doing this out of our passion and out of the love in our hearts for the cause. We do have a few circle rules, which I just want to touch on, if that's okay. So the first one is confidentiality. Trust is absolutely critical. What happens in our circle stays in our circle. And I know it's tricky to extend that to an online environment, but it really is important, especially when we're talking about a topic that could be considered a bit controversial, like money. So the way that we do that is by creating a safe and inclusive environment, respect the views, choices and feelings of others, and to challenge others in a constructive way. And then the next one is communication. So commit to sharing openly and honestly and listen with empathy. Share your personal experiences, the good and the bad, and listen to the contributions from others. Now, tonight is a panel discussion. So I've got a few initial questions to put to our panelists, but after that, I'm going to open it up to the floor. And I would love to get your questions. This is a really good topic. We have got a panel of experts to take your questions. So please put your questions in the chat box and we will try to get some answers for you. And then the third circle fundamental is commitment. So invest in the circle success and be fully present at meetings. Be present, connect with others. There's some brilliant people here, so feel free to connect with them inside and outside of the meetings. Champion our members and offer support to others when you can. And just a little note as Lean in Leeds is evolving. Bear with me a sec. We've been working really hard behind the scenes to get things changed for the better. So just a little bit on that. We have a mission statement now, which is to lift each other up. We have a vision in place, which is to level up the structure and the functions of Lean in Leeds to serve our ever-growing community, to advocate for women during the pandemic, and to align with the Lean In global strategy. We are a global movement. And we have some objectives for the year as well, which I won't go into now, but we will be having a meeting soon to discuss those. And then the other one I just wanted to touch on was structure, because we have been working really hard behind the scenes to implement a new structure that supports our growth and engages with our community. Just for now, just to introduce myself, I'm Claire Ackers. I am a leadership coach and I am the chair of Lean in Leeds for this year. And I also have my co-chair, Joe Penkett, who's on the panel this evening. We also have some amazing stream leads who are working really hard to bring everything together. I just want to make a quick mention to the mentoring scheme. Pauline, who heads that up, that's really going from strength to strength. We have a new community stream that's headed by Anne, and we've got some brilliant projects we're going to be launching there. around providing for project one is providing role models in schools to engage with that community, and we also have a brand new diversity and inclusion stream. At Lean in Leeds, we've made a commitment to strive to have D&I at the heart of everything we do. Okay, so on with tonight's main topic. Here is your panel for this evening. I'm just going to get rid of this actually, so I don't need it so much anymore. Yay, there you are. Okay, so let's start with a massive disclaimer. This event is intended to educate and to inspire, but Lean in Leeds and any of the lovely panelists here are not responsible for any action you choose to take or do not take as a result of this evening. And we also advise that you don't share too much personal information. Everyone okay with that? Marvellous, thank you. That being said, we are here to inspire you about money, to bust some myths about money, and to empower you to take control of your money. So let's dive in. So I am going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves first of all, and then we've got some questions to go for them. And then, as I mentioned, please do put your questions in the chat. And if there's anyone specific you would like to answer your question, then please put their name in there as well, so I can direct your question to them. So I'm going to come to Diane Watson first of all. Diane, would you like to? Shall I take you off mute and then you can introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. So my name is Diane Watson. I'm a principal partner with Sovereign Wealth based in Leeds. I also am the founder of an education piece called She Can Prosper, which I set up actually during the pandemic, but it was something that I had in mind for a long time. And my mission with She Can Prosper is to encourage women to educate themselves about financial matters, to understand their own situation, to find out what they don't know, and to make sure that they're not in situations where they're disadvantaged because they didn't really understand what they didn't really know about with regards to money.
Brilliant. Welcome, Diane. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, just take myself off mute. Hi everyone, so I'm Sarah Keithley. I'm a senior consultant at a company called XPS Pensions Group, and so I specialise in pensions. I've been involved, I'm also a member of the Lean in Leeds steering group as well, and I've been involved with Lean in Leeds for just a bit less than a year now. And last year I did I did a talk for Lean in Leeds at their conference about the gender pension gap. And as part of that, I did some research into the pension gap. So the gender pension gap is the difference between what women and men kind of get as an average pension. And I kind of assumed that the reasons that exists were, just to do with the fact that women get paid less in general. But some of the stuff I found out when researching that was there's actually a lot of other reasons that, things like the difference between women and men's kind of engagement in financial matters and understanding and things like that. So that's kind of the reason I'm really interested in some of this stuff is that, really interested in, why aren't women as engaged in pensions as men, and what can we do about that? So that's kind of where that's my special subject, if you like.
Marvellous, thank you. Helen, can I come to you next if you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks. Hello everyone. Hi, I'm Helen. I'm from Step Change Debt Charity. We're the UK's largest debt advice charity, and I think there's possibly a couple of my colleagues joining us tonight, so hi to you too. I am a partnership manager at Step Change, so I look after a lot of partnerships that we have with other organisations, other charities, other government bodies. I've worked at the charity for just over 15 years, and during that time, through numerous roles that I've had at the charity, I've been able to get lots of really great experience and understanding of the type of clients that come to us. And one of my interests is really trying to raise the awareness of debt and how it can affect anybody. It's not a certain group that it affects, it permeates across the whole of society. So what I'm keen to do is to raise awareness of the support that's out there for people who are dealing with debt and lots of the associated issues, and make sure people who need help are getting that really good, decent and free help, because the last thing you want to do is have to pay for advice when you're in debt.
Perfect, thank you. And then Jo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Jo Penkert. Some of you may already know me, probably quite a few of you. So I'm also co-chair of Lean in Leeds alongside Claire and Sarah, but also work for Step Change Debt Charity alongside Helen. And I also, so I'm commercial finance and projects manager there. I started there in February or March this year. And I've also got my own business called Thin Synthesis, which is a commercial finance company, just providing sort of support, guidance and consulting services for micro, small and medium enterprises. So I've got about 20 years experience in business and finance across a range of settings, so small, medium and large entities, working across various different industries, including railway, technology, tech services, healthcare, now in a charity. So a little bit of everything under my belt from a sort of business finance perspective, I would say.
Amazing, thank you, Jo. Just want to come to the chat momentarily. Leanne is saying, so excited about this talk. I haven't a clue about pensions and investments. Leanne, we will sort you out. Again with the disclaimer. And then there's some questions coming in, so I'm going to save those just for the moment, but please do keep putting your questions in. Okay, so let's go to Diane. Diane, let's get the foundations right first. What is the very first thing that you want people to know about managing their finances?
Is what they're entitled to. So if they're working for a company, I mean, I had a conversation with a girl last night, you know, what happens if you get ill? No idea. How long will you be paid? Don't know. You know, have you joined the pension scheme? Not sure that I should. So, you know, my cry to action for anyone is to really understand, if they're employed, what's available through their work. If they're running their own business, is to understand that they need to do things sooner rather than later. You know, they can't just hope that everything's going to be okay. So, you know, look at what things would happen, for example, if they can't work, if they can't run their business. You know, what can they do to protect themselves from that? And really get under the bonnet of what they need to do to make sure that they're going to be okay. Just, I mean, initially in the very now, because, you know, not being able to earn money is obviously massively impactful on our financial well-being. And then to think about things that they want to do so that they're going to be okay longer term.
Is there a really basic error that you see time and time again?
Well, some of the research shows that women are incredibly cautious when it comes to money. So one of the impacts on that is that women are not as confident about making choices regarding how to invest their money. So that could be a pension, it might be other things that they do. And that obviously over the medium to long term is massively impactful on where they end up. So, you know, we need to help women, I think, understand that it's okay to take some risk. I mean, we're not talking about massive risks, but that in order to be comfortable, that you need to take action, and you need to do things possibly that are a little bit outside of your normal comfort zone so that you can be okay in the future. Brilliant.
If anyone has any questions that are coming up for you as Diane's talking, or any of our panelists, stick them in the chat box, and we will come to them. But have there been any specific effects from the pandemic that you've seen? Any sort of marked changes, Diane, that you've noticed since March?
Well, I mean, there's been some great things, because we've noticed that more women than ever have decided to set up their own businesses. We can see a growing trend towards women being very entrepreneurial. So that's a really positive thing. But with the setting up of a business oneself, that also perhaps leaves women more vulnerable to the sort of packages that might be available if they were, you know, working for someone else. So that's kind of one of the things that we've really noticed.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that Jo's going to go into a bit more detail about that, but you're absolutely right. It's education, isn't it, at the basics level? So yeah. It's up to us to educate ourselves about the risks and the possibilities of, and kind of go into things with our eyes open.
definitely.
Brilliant. Sarah, I'm going to come to you next, as pension seems like a good bookend from starting your business to your pension at the end of it. What do people need to know about pensions?
Okay, so I guess the probably the most important thing to understand about pensions is that at the heart they're not something that is that complicated. It's just it's at the heart, pensions are just a way of saving for your future. So yeah, it's true that there are sort of complicated tax rules around some things that, you know, sometimes you might need to know about, but at the heart they really are just a way of you to save for your future. So really, that's probably the sort of biggest message I want to get across to people. I think you know, if you're not sure whether you should get a pension because there's other options available, I think that you know, the question should just be, do I want to save for my future, and do I want to do that in the most efficient way I possibly can? And I think if the answer is yes, then the answer is a pension's probably something that you should think about. The other thing is probably that the power of saving for a pension early and saving for pension consistently. So there's all sorts of you know, I'm a maths graduate, and so I'm essentially a massive geek about some of this stuff, but so I won't go into the kind of equations behind it, but you know, you can find loads of, if you Google something like the power of compound interest, you can find tons and tons of examples on this. But the math is really astonishing on this. Starting saving into a pension 10 years earlier can double the amount of money you get out of your pension at the end of it. So, you know, so if you delay saving into your pension, it just makes, you know, you have to catch up more than you otherwise would if you delay. So that the two big things are kind of, you know, don't be afraid of them. They're not some kind of scam, and there's nothing you know, at the heart there's nothing complicated about pensions, and also, you know, saving early is really the biggest thing you can do to influence how much pension you'll get at the end of it.
Yeah, and that's absolutely good practice. But what if there's somebody watching this who thinks, do you know what, I've left this a little bit too late? Yeah. They're feeling perhaps a bit old and like they've missed the train on the pensions front. What should they do?
So I think my answer would be, don't panic, don't kind of procrastinate. I think the worst thing you can possibly do with things like pensions is kind of, I guess, be so paralyzed by the amount of the options that are available and the questions that you have that you don't do anything. So it comes back to the same point of kind of, you know, the earlier you can do something, the better. So I would advise anybody who's kind of worried that they've left things too late and doesn't know, you know, for example, if you don't know how much you might need to save to get a good pension, don't start with that. Don't start with those kind of questions. Start with, like, look, where can I save into a pension and how much can I afford to put in now? Once you've started on that journey, you can then, you know, tweak the details as you go along. But you know, generally the really important thing is just to do something and start to kind of understand what your options are, start to understand how much you can afford to put in, and then sort of build it from there.
Yeah, to mess up a well-known phrase, when's the best time to start saving for a pension? Yesterday. When's the next best time? Today.
Yeah, so it's that thing about a tree, isn't it? What's the best time to plant a tree is 100 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. Yeah.
So let's talk about the pensions gap. Because I remember that great talk you did at Unspoken conference about, I think you had a chart with a man and a woman start at the same stage in their career. Well, you explain it better than me.
Yeah, so basically the gender pension gap is you know, the difference between an average man's and average woman's pension pot when they get to retirement age, and it's actually it's a lot higher than the equivalent gender pay gap, and there's lots of reasons for that. So I think I talked in the Unspoken conference about it. There's a few different reasons for that. So the biggest reason is the fact that there's a pay difference in the first place. So you know, you might think that one's the most obvious one. If you've got less, you know, if you're earning less money, then you're going to be able to save less into a pension. So that's kind of the reason that's probably the hardest one to solve, to be honest. So, you know, but that's not the only kind of driver of this. There's all sorts of other things. So having time off work to have children is obviously another driver. So if you take time out of work, then you're taking savings out of your pension. Now, sometimes people, you know, let's say you go part-time or something after having children, that will obviously impact how much you can put into your pension as well, even if you sort of level up the pay differences. So that's another one. The sort of third and fourth ones I found the most surprising, and I didn't sort of know about either of these really until I sort of started digging into it. The third one is divorce, which I found really kind of surprising. It's not something that's talked about that much in sort of money circles really, but women typically come out of divorces like a lot worse off in terms of pension than men do. And one of the reasons for that is that actually it's often not even discussed as part of a divorce settlement. So you know, if you don't, for example, if you don't go to court to settle a divorce, you can't do anything about the pensions, you can't split them up. So there's no mechanism for doing that. And often it's not even discussed because people just don't think about it. And the fourth reason, which is probably the one that takes us back to why we're here today, is there's a real difference in engagement between women and men on long-term savings and pensions. Now, so even if you take women who are very comfortable with their day-to-day finances and kind of budgeting and you know, mortgages and things like that, even if you take those women who are quite well educated and very comfortable with their day-to-day finances, there's still a gap for those people when you look at long-term savings. And I think some of the reasons for that is the sort of mental barriers around things like, you know, this is something that's more complicated and I don't understand it. You know, I have to know about investments to know what to do with my pension. And I think there seems to be some kind of mental barrier there that stops women from getting fully engaged in some of that process and really getting the most out of their pension. And I think, I think it might have been Diane that alluded to this earlier. You know, some of that leads to women being more cautious when they invest their pension or choose how to invest their pension, and that also leads to lower returns and ultimately a lower pension income when you get to retirement.
It's pretty scary stuff, really. I mean, just we're almost bordering on marriage counselling here, aren't we? Talking about there needs to be some really, really strong conversations with your spouse where you kind of give up your earning power, I guess, getting onto that territory. What about the effect of the pandemic on pensions? Have you seen anything interesting happening there?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of things. One thing that's quite a worrying kind of quite a worrying impact of the pandemic is that there's been a huge rise in what we term pension scams, so that people being kind of called out of the blue and being offered some kind of like too good to be true investment and induced to move their pension somewhere where essentially either they're being, you know, best case they're being put into a product that's completely unsuitable for them and has really high charges and that erode their pension pot. Worst case, somebody clears out their accounts and disappears off to the Bahamas and they never see them again. Some losers don't have pension. I guess the good news from this group's perspective is that actually it's men that are more likely to be scammed from a pensions perspective, and it's quite interesting because people that are most likely to fall victim to things like pension scams are people that have some basically a limited amount of financial savviness and sort of, you know, feel like they know what decisions to make, but actually have a sort of low level of knowledge. So it's kind of people that feel almost like overconfident financially, which is possibly kind of the opposite, you know, problem that maybe some people in the group have, which is that, you know, I know I don't know very much, so that's why I'm not doing anything, which can be a good thing. And I guess the other end of the spectrum is kind of just the whole, you know, people struggling with, you know, maybe people being furloughed or struggling with income, just, you know, coming out of pension completely when their times are getting tough, and you know that's going to be a tough decision to make. But yeah, you know, I guess it's the kind of, you know, there's always going to be a tension there when people are having, you know, tough decisions.
Wow, yeah, interesting stuff, definitely. There've been lots of questions coming in on the pension side, but I'm going to move on and then we'll come back to questions a little bit later on if that's okay with everybody. I'm going to come to Jo next, slightly more positive topic, hopefully. Not that pensions isn't very, very exciting and riveting, Sarah, but we're going to be talking, well, I'll let you introduce it, Jo, but basically, well, certainly I'm seeing it in my line of work, but people are lots of redundancies, lots of businesses going under. People are following their hearts and setting up a business and launching their own business, and we're seeing the rise of this passion economy. Essentially, where people are thinking, "Sod it, I'm going to follow my heart and do it my way, and have everything on my terms." You know, security of being employed isn't necessarily as much, and we are seeing a lot of people launching their own businesses. What do people need to know about doing that, about launching their own business from a finance perspective, Jo?
So interestingly, I'm a bit of a strange finance person because I think a bit more about the holistic view of everything in a business. So that's why it's the commercial finance part. So if I was an accountant and just a traditional sort of accounting person, what I'd say to you is, well, you need to think about cash. Cash is king. You need to think about your profit and loss, which is what you call P&L, or your income statement, which is what you're going to make, what your costs are, and what your profit is, basically. But being a bit different to that, the kind of things that I'd sort of encourage people to think about that are a bit wider than that, which is why 80% of businesses fail in the first 2 years. Yes, it's to do with cash, but a lot of what it's to do with is actually poor planning and not thinking about all the things you should or could do to get the model right. So it's thinking about, when I'm building a pricing structure, have I set what I think that my prices should be? Do I understand the costs of those things that I want to deliver? And how much am I prepared to move to grow the business? Because effectively, how much will you give away? And do you understand what that's doing to your profit margin for the products when you give that money away? So some of these words might not be familiar to you, and some will. I guess there's loads and loads of resources out there. Obviously, this is a very short discussion, so I would recommend for anyone that's looking at starting a business, the first places to go would be things like Companies House, HMRC. There's lots of information out there just from like Investopedia on what some of the terminology is and things like that. Just very simple things like what is a P&L, what is a cash flow, and these sorts of things. There's also lots of resources in terms of people to help that don't cost money. And
yeah, so tell us more about those. What help's available?
So the government funds lots of different initiatives, and a lot of the time these things don't actually get utilised by people, just simply through to lack of awareness. So I'll give one example. There's a programme called Accelerate, and what they do is they provide courses for small businesses that are just starting out, and they can provide focus, and they can provide them with like a mentor where they can help them in understanding. They sort of tend to do it like a programme, so there's like sort of a 5-step approach over 6 months, and at the end of it you'll get to know a little bit about everything to do with starting up a business. It wouldn't tell you everything that you need to know, but it's a lot of knowledge and resources out there. And like I say, these things are quite valuable, sometimes valued at sort of 10 up to 30, 40, 50,000 pounds. There's also a lot of pots of money available for providing technology. So if you've got an idea for a software that you want to build, for example, you might be able to get grant agreements. So constantly keeping your eye on what grant agreements are being launched, and just generally Googling grant agreements or innovation pots or anything like that, you'll find there's so much out there that people just aren't aware of. And the more you look, the more you'll find. One important thing with that, because I look after this every day, is if you are going to take money for something but you have to prove what you spent it on, make sure you do it, and make sure you track what you're spending it on, because there is recourse sometimes for these things. So it's just really important. It's fine for you to take the money and to use it to do what you've said you're going to do, but I wouldn't ever think that it's just a handout which you're not going to have to explain, because it could always come back to you. Aside from that, I'm just going to say sort of 5 more things that I think, just words. So protect your IP. If you're creating a software or technology, make sure you're going to have contracts and they're going to be good quality, and pay someone to do it, or try to find ones that are really, really good quality. Create a pricing model that has options in it and that is flexible enough to do what you want to do, and try to stick with it if possible, apart from maybe some bespoke things that you might be delivering for your clients depending on your business. Understand your costs, I've already said. Make sure you get accreditations, and don't try to run a business that you aren't accredited to run, because it probably won't work out well in the long run. And manage your cash, understand your cash, and make sure that at all times, if you're trying to grow, that you understand how the cost of the business is going to grow as you scale. That's probably, in a nutshell, everything that you need.
Oh my gosh, that's like a whistle-stop tour into how to start a business. Is anybody here thinking about starting a business? Got a question for Joe? Make sure you stick it in the chat there. What is the Joe? What's the most common mistake you see? Like, what's like a basic rookie error that you want to shake people about and say, "Oh, don't do that. You can so easily mess everything up."
I think honestly, not having a business plan, not actually, and when I say business plan, I don't mean one piece of paper that says I want to do this and it's going to make me £5 million. I mean, really researching and understanding. In fact, if most businesses just had a proper business plan and literally looked at what does a business plan have to have in it, and you can find this online, literally Google Images can help you with half of it, a strategy on a page, sort of a proper cash flow, a realistic one, thinking about all the costs that you haven't thought about and really testing, have I thought about all those things, and understanding competitive market as well, just what's going on around you, because it's not just about what you want, but it's about what others are doing and whether actually it's going to work in alignment with the industry.
Wise words there. Thank you very much. And then our last panel member, I'm going to come to Helen. So you are a relationship manager for Step Change Debt Charity, but you're not here representing Step Change, are you? Views are all your own, I do have to say. But I do know that you are super passionate about breaking down taboos around debt. How do we normalise debt and normalise talking about debt?
I think just by talking about it, Claire, I think we do have quite a skewed view on, or a skewed approach to money and debt in this country. And it's often quite at odds with some of our European counterparts. For example, there's one of the Scandinavian countries where people's earnings are public knowledge. You can go onto a register and you can see how much people are earning. But if that was me, I would literally be scouring my neighbour's take-home pay every night. But it's just complete opposite of what we do here. I mean, just a question for you to answer yourselves. Do you know how much your best friend earns? Do you maybe even know how much your partner earns? Some partners will keep that information separately. Or are you completely open and honest and talk about it all the time? But I think the vast majority of us, we keep those kind of conversations very close to our chest. We don't talk about things that we're finding difficult. We don't talk about the fact that we struggle to afford something. We'll make up another excuse for it. If we're put on the spot about how much we earn, we might add a few more £1,000 onto it to make it sound better. And then I think all of that just on top of one another just creates this false image of what our circumstances are really like. And I think until we start to be more transparent about money, be more honest about money, this whole topic is going to continue to be a taboo. And I think that prevents us from sometimes making sound choices and improving our financial capability. As a nation, our financial capability is pretty low. And I would say, unfortunately, for women in some areas it is low. As Sarah was talking about with the whole pension arena, women are more risk averse. They're not willing to take those chances and that would yield dividends in the future. And I think the more we talk about it, although it's not always the most riveting of conversations, the more it's going to benefit us all in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming full cycle to what Diane was saying, isn't it? About just educate yourself, just talk about it, just shine a light, and let's just talk about money.
Mm-hmm.
You and I had a bit of a chat yesterday, didn't we, Helen? I was saying that I went to university in 2000, so I was the first year that had student loans instead of grants. And then from then on in, I think certainly my generation has all been about debt's normal. You know, it's normal to take on a load of debt for whatever you want. Whereas with my parents' generation, it was much more about working hard and earning things, and much more that attitude towards things. And just to make the distinction between debt and problem debt, which I know you're keen to talk about, and so that's part A, the distinction between problem debt and normal debt, or I'm sure you've got a better term for it than that. But and then part B is, what should people do if they find themselves in problem debt? What's your advice?
Yeah, so with part A, yeah, absolutely. We have debt and we have problem debt. They're perfect terms. Most of us will have some form of debt, whether it's a student loan, whether it's credit cards, store cards. I'm sure a lot of us will have mortgages. Debt is fine, and that's how we're able to achieve some of our goals in life. It's by having a debt. Very few people can afford to buy a house outright. You have to take on a debt to buy that house. And for the majority of us, we're able to manage that debt. It's just part and parcel of managing our money. When our income comes in, wherever that income might be from, we're then able to service that debt. The average person on the street, you could say the average person in this room, will have several £1,000s of consumer debt, and that's normal. And by that, I mean store cards, credit cards, overdrafts, completely normal. But for some people, that debt will turn into problem debt. For some people, that debt could become problem debt when it reaches 50,000. For some people, that problem debt could start when it reaches £500. It's all very much dependent on your circumstances and what you're able to manage. But problem debt is what I eat, live and breathe at Step Change, as do my colleagues that also come from Step Change. You know, we see people day in, day out who, for so many different circumstances, find themselves in financial difficulty. Very, very, very rarely is it through recklessness. It is through all other things completely out of people's control. It's sudden life events just happening without any forewarning.
Like
it's
COVID.
It's COVID, which unsurprisingly is the number 3 cause of debt that clients cite to us at the moment when they come through to us for support. So in the vast majority of cases, it's things that are far beyond people's control. And I think there's a couple of key messages I would like to get across. The first one is not an easy one, and it's around financial resilience. So as a nation, we have pretty poor financial resilience. And that's around people's safety nets. It's their safety blanket that they have to cover should something bad happen. So it's that often lauded 3 to 6 months of expenses in a bank account somewhere. Very, very few people have that. And in a lot of cases, it's because they haven't got the means to do that. But I think what we need to do as individuals is, if we can, to just try and put something away. But then there's a much broader societal political piece that needs to be done, in that many people just do not have that luxury of being able to put something aside each month. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done beyond what I can really do in terms of increasing people's what they're able to get from an income, wherever that income might come from. So financial resilience, we really need to improve that. And the second thing is around seeking help if you do have problems. It is not an easy step to do. We know at Step Change that about half of our clients will wait 12 months before they come to seek help. So about 50% of clients wait 12 months before they seek help. And during that time, obviously, things have got progressively worse. So it's about reaching out to get help. There's so many ways you can get help these days. You can go and see somebody with a local face-to-face agency. You can pick up the phone and talk to one of our lovely advisors. Or if you don't want to do either of those, you can go online and you can seek advice. So I would just really want to get the message across that people do seek advice as early as they're struggling. The earlier you seek help, the more options you will have, and to not feel it's their fault, because for a start, we will not judge, certainly at Step Change, nor will other advice agencies. And secondly, we're not really interested in how you got there. We're interested in getting you out of that situation and getting life back to how it was before. So really, if you can take one thing away from what I remember, what I've been talking about is just to seek help, and please go to a free advice agency like Step Change. When you Google agencies like us, be very careful. There are far too many commercial organisations out there pretending to be us, or looking to make a quick buck by introducing you to commercial fee charging firms. So just be absolutely sure that you're at the right place when you go to seek that help. And I can put some web addresses on can't I, Claire, where people can type in directly to make sure you get to the right place?
Yeah, that'd be great, actually. Yes. We're going to try and put some resources together following this talk. So if anybody wants signposting to any particular thing that someone's mentioned, stick it in the chat and we'll make sure that we get that advice. And, you know, I really hope that whoever needs to hear that message from Helen, that it lands and it helps somebody that's watching tonight. Okay, so let's change direction slightly. One of the aims of this conversation is to have an empowering conversation about money. I do a lot of money mindset work with the clients that I work with, basically looking at limiting beliefs around money. And just for an example, one of the limiting beliefs that I was brought up with was that we might not be rich, but at least we're honest. Like the idea being that rich people must have got it dishonestly in some way. So I'd like to come to the panel and just kind of ask, what is a myth that you either have had or have heard commonly about money? And I would love it, lovely audience, if you would put any myths that you have or have had around money in the chat box as well. So let's get those myths out there. Let's bust some. And see if we can shine a light on those. So Diane, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay. Myths about money, what have you heard?
Well, I think I was brought up in quite a religious home where the pursuit of money was seen as something that was really not a nice thing to do. And I think I probably carried that into my adult life. So, and I see this a lot with my clients where women feel uncomfortable about being successful, about earning money, about having money, and it ties in with not feeling good enough, it not being very nice to have the riches of one's hard work to show for it. So I think that's something that I've definitely kind of taken from my childhood.
Thank you. Sarah, let's come to you next.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the ones that I sort of struggle with, that I hear people, well, maybe not hear people saying, but kind of hear implied quite a lot in money, is that risk in itself is a bad thing when it comes to investing in pensions, and the kind of similar belief that kind of investing in the stock market, for example, you sometimes hear people talk about investing in the stock market as gambling on the stock market, and I think that's a myth that I really would like to dispel, because I think that I would characterize investing for the long term, investing in the stock market is one of the most sensible investments you can make. It's nothing like gambling. There are investments that you can make that are like gambling, so investing in Bitcoin, probably, that kind of thing, you know, the sort of slightly more off the wall investments that you hear about. But investing in the stock market in itself is actually a very, very sensible long-term plan for most people. So you know, it's that idea that, you know, often we see in pensions literature, you know, stock market investments being characterized as risky or high risk, and that, you know, that means something quite specific, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. And I think that's a really dangerous belief.
Yeah, interesting. Risk is bad. If this is resonating with you, let's use the reactions button. We've got that function. So I've got a little clappy hand here. I've got a thumbs up. I've got a heart. I've got a laughing emoji. I've got, I guess that's shock. And I've got a little celebration one there. So if you are hearing what we're saying, let's get a few reactions going. Okay, Jo, let's come to you next. Myths about money. What have you heard?
Well, my favourite one that I hear nearly every day is, I'm not a finance person, I don't understand spreadsheets. So it's not really so much money, but it's how you track and control your money. So what I would say is, you don't need to be a master of spreadsheets as long as you can understand even the most basic of maths. And what you can do is just go on to Excel and go new template, and there are tons of things that will just do it for you. So there's budgets, there's financial things, whether it's to do with the business or your personal finances. There are literally tons and tons of resources at your fingertips. If you don't understand any of it, there's always Google, and there's lots of free courses on it, both on FutureLearn and on lots of other different websites as well. So that's the main one for me.
I have been guilty of that one in the past. I will hold my hands up to that. Don't understand spreadsheets. But I'm glad to say, you know, 6 years into being a director of a business, I've pulled my finger out on that front now. Helen, myths about money.
I've got a couple, if that's all right.
Yeah,
Claire.
go for it.
The first one that I would like to challenge is people's loyalty to a particular financial provider. That financial provider is not necessarily looking out for your best interests, they're looking out for their best interests. So I would urge everybody to absolutely shop around and make sure you are getting your money to work as hard as it possibly can for you. A classic example might be going into a high street bank, building society, and you get offered, would you like this new savings account? Never say yes immediately and sign up. Shop around. There's probably somewhere where you can get a better deal, and in the long run you're going to get more money in your back pocket. The second one was a lesson that I learned very early on in my days as a debt advisor when I was being trained 15 years ago, and it was around working out how many days you were going to have to work to pay for something, and by doing that you can then make a sound decision on whether that's something that you're happy to pay for or not. So no, it could be something quite frivolous like a pair of shoes or a coat. If you're having to work 2 hours for it or 10 hours for it or 2 weeks for it, is that a sensible decision? Are you happy to do that, yes or no? And it's often quite a good way of just checking in with yourself and reducing the amount of rash purchases that you make.
Claire, can I add a bonus one?
Go for it.
I think this is one thing we talked about.
Is that a money joke?
Oh, no, it wasn't, but okay, yes, it was. I think it's touched on some of the things that people have said in the comments as well. If it's true love, you don't need to talk about money. That's one of the myths that I'd like to dispel.
Ooh,
I think that the debate about talking to your partner about money and understanding both your incomes, understanding what pensions you have, understanding what happens when you have children and one of you works less, you need to talk about all that stuff. You know, it doesn't matter whether you think it's kind of, it suggests that you're looking for the exit. It doesn't suggest that. It just suggests you know what's going on.
That's so interesting though, isn't it? Because if we think about the fairy tale that many girls are brought up with, it's, you meet your prince in shining armor and you get married and you live happily ever after, but you never have a conversation around who's going to pay for the carriage or any of the practicalities. It's not really built into the fairy tale, isn't it? But I've been divorced, I've been a single mum, and it's blooming tough on your own. And I've had to learn many hard lessons that I probably should have learned a bit earlier in life, but you live and learn, don't you? Okay, right, I'm going to stop spilling and come to some questions. Okay, so Leanne is asking, I've got disposable income that I'd like to make work better than it does currently in savings accounts. I keep looking online at getting financial advisors, but I'm scared of a hard sell. What should I look for? Diane, I think I'll come to you first on this one, if that's okay.
Well, I mean, I think somebody's already said, shop around.
Yeah.
Meeting people, find someone that you think has got your best interests at heart, someone that you can gel with, someone that you feel you can build a long-term relationship with. I think that's one of the most important things. And if you feel that someone's giving you a hard sell, then just walk away because they're not the right person for you. Anyone that really cares about giving you advice ought to have your best interest at heart, and you need to find someone that you feel confident will do that.
Is there a question that you can think of that would help qualify that, or is it more about going off gut feel about who you get on with and who you connect with?
I think some of that will be about when you meet them, how they are, the kind of questions that they ask you. Do you feel that they're trying to pressure you into doing something immediately, or are they, gathering information, really wanting to understand your situation properly? And if they're prepared to give you advice that doesn't actually involve them selling you anything, because that now is not the right time, then that's the kind of person that you want to gravitate towards, rather than someone who is desperate to tell you you need something, whether you do or you don't.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, next question. So Jessica's saying, I also read something on the BBC about the government borrowing money by selling bonds. What does that mean in terms of investing in government bonds? I'm going to come to Jo on that one, if that's okay, Jo.
Sure. Sarah might have something to chip in here as well, but in terms of my accountancy training, we do learn about what these things are. So I will explain it a bit like an overdraft. It's not really like that. It's like a loan. Governments trade bonds with each other internationally, and it's effectively like us taking out a loan with another country. So it sits as an asset to them and we owe it to them. And for us, it's a liability, meaning we owe them it. But it's a long-term thing. So I know that you've seen probably that there's been a massive spike since June in our borrowing. So what we're doing is we're offsetting a short-term cost that's huge over a long-term repayment period. And what's good about that is you can get that at a really low rate of return. So we will have to pay some interest on it, but it will be much reduced from doing any other type of borrowing. So if we don't have the physical liquid cash available to do all the things we need to do, it's a very sensible way actually to generate funds. It does generate a problem in the long term, but there's lots of other things that can be done to offset that and plan for that, because it's likely to be 10 years long. And if it's with lots of different countries, it diversifies the risk of that borrowing as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that, or is Joe?
Yeah, so I think the question was kind of around kind of what if I wanted to invest in a government bond, is that possible, and is that a good idea? I suppose, I don't know if that's the question, but I can answer that question. So I think the government does borrow money by selling bonds to investors, and the vast majority of investors that own government bonds, which basically means the government owes them money, are actually pension funds and also insurance companies that have pension funds that they kind of insure. And the reason for that is that pension funds and insurance companies, they have to pay out pensions over a long period of time. The income that you get from a government bond, as Joe was saying, is kind of like an income over quite a long period of time, so they find it a really good investment. The downside of that is that there's lots and lots of demand for government bonds, which is good for the government because it means that actually there's lots of demand, which means that they can sell them quite cheaply, so the government's interest rates are quite low. What that means for normal investors, so day-to-day people that want to invest their money, is that you don't actually get a very good return on government bonds because they're so in demand. So you don't get a lot better rates than you would get on investing cash. So generally, if you're investing in a pension, if you've got a long period of time to invest, so let's say 20, 30, 40 years, it's not going to generate enough return for you to get a good return. But quite a lot of pension funds will kind of default invest for you, and what they'll do is put you into things like stocks and shares for most of your kind of the period that you're saving, and then they will put you into things like government bonds when you get to quite close to retiring, because they're much more stable and they are much more kind of similar to the sort of thing that you want to have when you're in retirement, which is a sort of steady income. So in terms of like the average person on the street, do you want to invest in government bonds? Probably not, but it is possible, and there are ways. If you have something like an investment ISA, you probably can invest in a government bond fund, and it may or may not be a good idea. But obviously, that's something that's straight into advice that I can't give.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to hone in on that. So I read the first part of the question, then I googled the article, and I'm not sure I've got the right article. But the article I was looking at was where do government borrow billions from, so if it was about that, that's what I was answering, which was the first part of the question, if you like. Yeah,
and I think that it is quite interesting, because not a lot of people know that where they borrow them from is actually from people that have a pension.
I think it's where they've got all the money for a lot of the furlough stuff and things like that now.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? And we've got quite a few questions on pensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read all the questions, and then Sarah, if you want to speak to them, and if you're the panelists, you have any comments relevant to your area of expertise, and feel free to jump in on them as well. But let's lump them all together, and then we'll move on to a slightly different topic. So we've got one question: are the government going to change pensions? Is it better to save using an ISA? Then another question: my husband owns his own business, limited company. He doesn't have a pension and it makes me nervous. He thinks there's no point if he's the only one paying into it. I can see you cringing. How does a business owner set up their own pension? I've done that. If I have a company pension, is it worth also having a private pension, or just pay more into the company one? And then the final question on pensions: I've been saving circa 17% of my salary into my pension monthly, which includes employer matching, but the projections appears to have declined last year compared to presumably this year's compared to last year, and I look into my annual report, should I be worried? Sarah, over to you. What do you want to do with that lot?
Okay, well, I'll just sort of quick fire try and go through all of them. So, is the government going to change pensions? This comes up way more than you might think. People always seem to be worried that the government is going to somehow pull the rug from under people and change everything about pensions. And I feel like that's been an anxiety for people as long as I've worked for pensions. And so I'm not really sure where it comes from. I think it's just sort of maybe something that is just talked about a lot and people worry about it. Essentially, the sort of tax structure of pensions encourages people to save into a pension. It does that by kind of deferring the tax that you pay. So you don't pay tax when you pay money in, but when you take it out, you pay tax. But you also get a tax-free lump sum when you draw your pension, which is one of the things that makes pensions really attractive. The government has never said it has any plans to change that. Most voters are pensioners or close to retirement, so any government that did change that would get voted out or be very unpopular. So it's very, very, very unlikely that the government would make wholesale changes to pensions to make them a lot less attractive, because it's just so unpopular. The government does try and change things around pensions from time to time, but they usually, so the most recent things that the government ever did change pensions is the sort of stuff that targets like highest earners that are getting quite a lot of tax relief from their pensions. So it's trying to reduce the amount of the treasury funds that go towards tax relief for high earners, which is sort of sensible. But yeah, in general, you shouldn't worry so much about that, because governments will it will be so unpopular that any government that tried to do it would.
We've got other stuff to worry about at the moment.
Yeah. So if you're self-employed, should you set up a pension, and how do you do it? So there's generally, if you're employed, there's two sort of free sources of free money that you get from a pension. One is your employer has to pay in as well. The other is the taxman adds something, so the taxman tops up your pension. If you're self-employed, you obviously don't get your employer paying in, but you still get the taxman giving you a bit of a boost. So anything you pay in to the pension doesn't get taxed. So that's a really good reason to save into a pension. How you go about it, you basically have to set up a personal pension. So Claire can tell you what she did. But
this is a limited company rather than self-employed, though, in this example. Okay, that's slightly different again, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, it is. Yeah, slightly different. But yeah, you basically, if you're self-employed and you don't have any employees and you're not a limited company, it's essentially setting up a personal pension. So I'd advise, if you already have like a trusted financial advisor or accountant, they could probably help you with where to go. But you basically have to find a product that's being sold by usually an insurance company or a financial provider. So yeah, either speak to someone you already trust about that to advise you on that, or do a bit of online research. I can share some resources for some of that in the chat as well.
I think that'd be really helpful if there's an online resource we can signpost people towards if they want to go and do their own research as to the best pensions provider. That'd be wonderful. Thank you. And then the decline in pensions pot, basically.
Yeah, I think there was one about if I have a company pension, should I also set up a private pension?
Sorry, yes.
So generally, obviously, like, individual circumstances may vary, but if you've got a company pension, your company has quite a lot of sort of strict rules that they have to follow to set up that pension. It means it has to meet certain quality standards. So it has to, the default fund that you invest in has to be sort of specially selected so that it is sort of suitable for most people. The charges can only be the charges can only be so high. So it has to be quite good quality if your employer has set it up. So generally that means that that's probably quite you don't have to worry about doing too much research if you just sort of pay more into your employer's pension fund, because there's so many sort of pitfalls with setting up your own private pension that I think it's probably safer to, if you can, pay more into your employer's pension. And usually you can pay you can pay more than the kind of minimum limit that they set. You can usually pay a lot more in. So obviously there's other circumstances that might mean that's not right for you, and I can't give advice to people, but that's probably what I do. And then so the person that's asked that their pension had declined over the last year, and should they worry about that? Probably not. The reason it's declined is probably because, like I said, most people's pensions are invested in the stock market for most of the time they're saving, and the stock market has been quite turbulent over the last year. And so depending on what particular point in time your statement was at, that could mean that it's declined since last year just because of the stock market moving up and down. That's not necessarily something to worry about in itself, unless you wanted to retire next year, or now. If you're retiring in 20 years' time, it will go up and down a bit. That's the nature of kind of investment risk. But that's only a worry if you're if you're taking, if you're invested a lot in the stock market and you're close to wanting to retire, that's a worry. But generally, you want to take more risk the younger you are, and then the closer you get to retirement, you sort of reduce the risk that you have, and then it should move around less when you get to the point that you're going to take it out. But generally, kind of fluctuations from year to year, especially in times like this, are not a reason in themselves to worry.
So keep an eye on it, but don't panic.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to move on from pensions, if that's okay with everybody. And it's more of a general question, which we've got no chance of solving tonight, but I would love to get your thoughts on it, which is, do you have any insights onto how we can reduce the gender pay cap in light of the pandemic? And I'm going to add a little bit to that question as well, which is, what effects have you seen on, do you think that the pandemic has unduly affected women more than men? Helen, I'm going to come to you first, if that's okay on that, because I'd be interested to see what you've seen from Step Change's perspective.
Yeah, I think from Step Change's perspective, it's difficult to probably say now. We need to maybe look 6-12 months down the line. We certainly have more women come to us than men anyway, and that's normal, that's usual. So more women will contact the charity for advice.
Why do you think that is?
The more, my own opinion, that we're more proactive and we'll kind of crack on and think, right, this needs sorting, and we can ask for help. You know, men don't like asking for directions, do they? Huge sweeping generalisation. But I think women generally are more happy to reach out and say, yeah, I need some help. And also there's probably an argument that more women are in charge of household finances, so can see these problems and want to do something about it. Conversely, women tend to have smaller levels of debt. So there are some differences. However, I think the pandemic has hurt women more than men, because in the main part, because the type of industries, the type of sectors that have been most affected by the pandemic, hospitality, retail, service industry, that's where you have more women working, so they will be more affected by that. There was a blog that came out by the London School of Economics recently saying that there has been an increase in the number of women coming out of the workforce during the pandemic compared to men. So that just strengthens the argument. How do you fix that? I don't know, that's difficult because you've got so many other factors playing into that. You've got the role of women in society, predominantly dealing with the majority of childcare, often more in low-income jobs than men. So I think it needs a concerted, combined effort on many fronts to try and make some changes in that.
Interesting. Diane, what's your take on this? Oh, let me just unmute you, Diane.
There we are. I've unmuted myself.
Marvellous.
I think what Helen said is true. I think women have been adversely affected by the pandemic. The types of jobs that they're doing are the ones, many of which we're now seeing, disappearing. So it will affect them proportionately more. And I do think it is, as Helen said, it is a bigger question about men and women and the kind of work that they do. It's not an easy fix. It's not a quick fix, actually. And obviously in lots of situations, I mean, I don't know whether you've been on calls yourself, women have been trying to work, they've been trying to look after the kids in the background, homeschool them. We know that proportionately the burden of lockdown has had more impact on women than it has on men. So yeah, it's a bigger problem really than just the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm just thinking anecdotally amongst my circle. I mean, we've got a friend in common, haven't we, Diane, who got a text yesterday. Schools, she's having to isolate. So that's 2 weeks. She's had to drop her business completely, and that's just game over. Self-employed person. What can you do? And we're all facing different but equally challenging circumstances, I think, at the moment.
I think if you're self-employed and you're running your own business, then obviously some of these things have been much more impactful, haven't they? And we know that women are turning more. I mean, certainly 26 years ago, when I started running my own business, most women were employed. So we've seen a massive rise in people who are responsible for their own financial well-being because they're either business owners or they're self-employed, which is effectively a business owner anyway. And all of these things come with many benefits, but they also come with some risk and some downside as well, particularly in difficult circumstances like the ones we see ourselves in at the minute.
I think if I could just come in there, I think that's one thing that's really irked me in this pandemic, and this is just anecdotally speaking from my experience. Amongst my social circles, my children are at school, so school playground, and also other friends. When the children have been at home, I would say without exception, it has been the mum that has been left to do the childcare and the work. And unfortunately, the man has been upstairs on calls with the door closed. And it is just almost taken as a given. And I cannot think of an exception, actually, where that has been the reverse. So the woman, it's almost like, oh, well, the woman can juggle her job and teach the kids at home. But the man, oh, no, too important, has to stay at home. And yeah, that's maybe just my experience. But that really did shock me that in this day and age, we're still seeing those really segregated roles without exception.
That was us for the first 6 months in our household. So my husband and I are co-directors. We have 3 children. And at the start of lockdown, so for the first 6 months, I basically had to stop being who I was at 9 a.m. and then try and homeschool an 11-year-old, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old baby, and then do my business in the evenings and weekends. And it was, oh God, I'm so glad we've gone past that. It was horrendous. It was absolutely horrendous. Yeah, I don't even want to go there. But interestingly enough, this time round, my husband's work is finished and we are the exact reverse. So this is my shed quarters at the bottom of the garden. I lock the door and I am not available as mum, and it's bliss, honestly. I'm not gonna lie. But yeah, and I'm just seeing, like you, Helen, at the school gates, just there's no easy answer. I haven't got an answer. It's just bonkers. It's been a bonkers year. Thank God there's only a month left of it. Let's have some chat in the box. Like, what's been your experience here of the whole disparity? Maybe you're single and it's loneliness that's the challenge for you. Maybe you're retired and it's not an issue at all, but you're kind of worried about your kids. I'd love to know your personal situation, and also if anybody has got any ideas for solutions for the gender pay gap, let's talk about them. Let's get them out there. So Liz is saying, I know a few guys who've really stepped up during the pandemic. Fabulous. Share them round. Let us know if any of them are single. Maybe we could do some matchmaking. Jo, have you got any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I do actually. It's a little bit of a different one because I was sort of thinking at it like, so a lot of things that I've heard is where people struggle to get access to men at work more so. And there is some feeling that, I've heard that people have said to me in my friendship group and things like that, oh, could this be to do with the fact that they're more likely to talk to their male friends because it's easier, you're on Zooms all day. If that's the nature of your work. And I think the important message is, there's a few things, one is to put yourself out there and make sure that, how do you know that they're not setting up proactively those meetings with those other people? Maybe go about doing that yourself. Suggest a meet up, if you can, to have a walk or a chat, something you can do within the rules. But it doesn't have to be that you're not visible to the other male and people in your business in order to make yourselves get access to opportunities, because gender pay gap is more about leveraging the opportunity, isn't it? And I think the other thing is educate yourself on how to support, build up relationships, gain rapport at the top of the triangle, and really try to remove the male element from it, because it's not always that's a barrier. I know it can be, but it's often actually it's more about building the relationship, and the barrier is more just finding a way around it, I would say. So for me, it's more thinking around the problem.
That's really interesting, and I'm just thinking about some of the companies and the leaders that I work with, and I know quite a few people who have said that they feel like their employer is using this situation to avoid the promotion conversation, to avoid negotiating pay. And I think that's going to be really interesting seeing that plays out, whether there is any disparity between men and women about men, whether people push for those promotions and those pay rises, or whether they feel grateful to have a job at all. Okay, so I'm going to come to another question. I think this is one for you, Joe. If you go into business with a loved one or relation, is it still 100% worth getting the paperwork in place?
I read this earlier.
So it's quite a short answer to that one.
Well, I would not give advice on this. I would say,
Of course.
of course, your own discretion. But if it was me, I'm a contracts woman. So for me, it just makes good sense. It's a bit like a marriage contract, very similar thing. In fact, you know, all you're doing is saying, I agree to this, that, and the other. And if it all goes wrong, this is the fallback. Really, well, that's the same as what you do with the business. So in order to set the expectation of what would happen if it fell apart or you fell apart, whatever, at least you've then got that in place. And it's not because you think it's going to happen, it's just in case it does, you all know where you stand and there's less complication. And it's a difficult thing to do, but I'd strongly suggest that it's a sensible thing to do.
It sounds like many of these issues we're discussing this evening could be solved with a good, honest conversation, or at least started to be solved with a good, honest conversation. Sarah, I just want to bring in one final point to finish, which is something, Sarah, you mentioned the other day, about there was something about buddies challenging each other to keep track of finances. Can you explain that idea?
Yeah, so this is something that I think one of the Lean In meetings that we had back when we were allowed to have in-person meetups. So it must have been earlier this year or end of last year. We were talking about ideas for events for the future, and one of the things we were talking about was financial stuff. And we talked a lot about today, haven't we, about sort of empowering yourself and educating yourself, and how that's a big part of all of this. And then a few people I talked to, and some of my friends that I talked to about some of the stuff, just do sometimes feel like they have a bit more of a mental block on some of the stuff. There's, you know, some people just feel less comfortable with money stuff and feel less comfortable with, you know, financial stuff. And one of the ideas we came up with that everyone got really excited about was kind of, you know, almost getting together with some friends and you know, having a bit of a blitz of some of this stuff. So you know, I sometimes get messages from friends who say, look, I'm really struggling to understand this, can you just help me, like send me some stuff and, you know, help me understand this. You know, if you have a friend or somebody that you think, you know, is good with money, you know, start a conversation, ask them for some help, ask them what, you know, what providers they use, what, you know, how much they save into their pension, and you know, that's a really good way to sort of, you know, get used to talking about that stuff, open up that conversation, but also, you know, help, you know, you can motivate each other, you can sort of, you know, hold each other to account and say, you know, let's both make a promise to call our pension provider and find out how much, you know, how much we're paying in or whatever. So yeah, so I think that's a really good tip if you're kind of, you know, in that boat. You know, or if you're the person that thinks that you are actually a bit more comfortable with some of the stuff, and you know, maybe some of your friends might need help. You know, it's just having that conversation. Like, we're all very, very reserved and British about talking about money, and so, you know, we can get over that initial hurdle of like, let's just talk about this. Like, you know, maybe when we put this recording up on YouTube, Claire, you know, people can send a link to their friends and say, let's watch this and let's sort it all out together.
I would love that. I'd consider us having a good evening's work if that happened, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to make sure that we finish on time, so I'll finish the comments there. But like I say, we'll edit this video, we'll get it on our YouTube channel, and we will put the resources in there as well that we've discussed. I know our lovely panelists have been putting some stuff into the chat box there if you want to have a quick squiz of that and note down any links that you want to take. And Joe's put some great tips in there as well. Helen's put step change in there, and I think that I saw Sarah dropping some pensions advice in there as well, and I'm sure Diane's put something in there as well that I've missed at some point. If not, I think she's going to get some links together for the resources page. But thank you, our lovely panelists. It's a tricky topic, and I think us Brits are pretty rubbish at talking about this generally. I hope, audience, that you have found this useful and that we have helped in some way. If there's any sort of burning topics that you want to to know more about on this, you know, Lean in Leeds is here to help you. So if you need a follow up on this, or you want to have like a circle discussion on it or anything like that, let us know, because we want to help, and we really want to make a difference. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you are not in our Lean in Leeds circle, then you can join that by going to leanin.org. And you connect with us on social media as well. We're on LinkedIn, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter a bit. But come and connect with us on there, and you'll find out about events coming up. We have got a mentoring scheme coming up soon. That new cohort is launching soon. We also have a brand new 18 to 30s mentoring scheme starting in January. If you know any young people, you are a young person yourself who would like to be involved in our very popular and effective mentoring mentee scheme. We've got lots of breakfast and evening events coming up in 2021, so watch this space for them. And we have our community projects starting soon as well. So the first one of those is going to be working on getting strong female role models into schools, basically female engineers, that kind of thing, to provide those role models to show kids just what is possible. I hope you have found this useful. Have lovely evenings, and if we don't see you, great Christmases and New Year's, and fingers crossed for 2021. Thanks for your time, everybody.